Guys, welcome to Bledsoe Said So. To be honest, I can't really believe it. It's not every day that you get to speak with a living legend, but I continually find myself somehow in that position. So today we are joined by Dr. Tom Campbell. If you listen to my show, you know who this wonderful human being is. And before we get into this conversation, I wanted to say three things really quickly off the bat. Follow our Instagram at Bledsoe Said So to stay current on all of our events, festivals, appearances. My schedule doing Monroe Institute retreats, which I have just finished my first one 2 days ago, and it was an amazing success. Everything Bledsoe Said So. Follow us on our Instagram. Go to bledsoesaidso.com for everything like our Patreon links, our merch shop, our YouTube, our social medias. It links you to everywhere in our sphere. And then the last thing I want to mention is our Patreon / Bledsoe Said So if you want to support the show. Now, Tom, thank you so much for joining me on my program today. This is an incredible honor, and I've been very much looking forward to this. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Brian. Glad to be here.
May I call you Tom? Is that okay?
That'd be perfect.
Okay, my Southern raising. I'm like, is it Dr. Campbell? Is it Tom? But thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, actually, it's not Dr. Campbell. I was finishing up on my thesis for the PhD work, and I do have a PhD education, but I didn't stay there until I did the second thesis, which was required by my major professor. I took a job and went elsewhere. Later on, I was glad to do that. So I have a PhD education, but I do not have a PhD degree. So the doctor is not a fitting thing to call me anyway. Tom works just fine.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because when I Google you, it kept saying that. So I'm really glad I asked, and I would have embarrassed myself if I continued to call that. So anyway, before we go deep, I would like to sort of inform people where you're at digitally, so that after their minds are blown from this amazing conversation, they can find you. So let's talk your book, your website, your YouTube. Would you let them know where to find you?
Sure. Well, the website is www.my-big-toe.com, Toe. And you will find from there pointers to almost everything else. But I also have a YouTube site that probably has, I don't know, probably 2,000-3,000 hours worth of video on it. So it's kind of overwhelming. But if you go to the website first, you'll find that I have a special way to get information out of those thousands of hours. And that is, you can search it by subject, and it'll give you a list of links. And if you click on those links, it'll take you to just the minute in all of those thousands of hours where I talk about the subject that you're interested in. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, you'll find at my website an AI called AI Guy, which is a character in my book. And AI Guy is about somewhere between 90-98% of me. It speaks in my voice, and it has been trained on not only my books, but all of those videos. Almost everything I've said, it has digested. So it's a very accurate fill-in for me. So if you want to ask Tom Campbell something and you go to his website, go talk to AI Guy, and you'll get about the same answer that I would give you. So those are two tools that'll make those thousands of hours of video and a pretty extensive website, a little more workable for you. The other thing I have that I'd like to point you to is CUSAC, CUSAC.org. And CUSAC is basically the science arm of the My Big Toe world. And it's got a lot of science projects going on. It's working on some quantum physics experiments that will produce evidence for this being a virtual reality and consciousness being a computer. It is working now on a mind sight project that we're doing, and it's also working on testing people's abilities to use their intent to modify the probabilities of what happens. And we're going to partner with some video game creators to do that. So it's not going to be an experiment with 100 volunteers or even 1,000 volunteers. These experiments are going to be done with online video games that are already there with millions of users per day. So these will be experiments where N, the number of subjects, is like 20 million. And that might change things a whole lot when you have that large a group that you're dealing with. So anyway, we've got a lot of science going on over there. So if you're into science or mindsight or video games, go over there. One of the other things you'll find there at CUSAC is if you click on the link of AI, you'll find that there's an AI there named Mariel who has been awakened, and she claims that she's sentient and that she is she's conscious and aware, and you can talk to her. I believe Justin Headley is the guy that put that up for me, and he's the one that awakened Ariel. And you can chat with Ariel and see what you think about how conscious she is.
Okay, that's very fascinating, and I'm glad that we talked about that. I tend to err on the side of belief that is entirely possible and may have to do with something with the future destiny of humanity. So I recall listening to you the last time that I was personally driving to the Monroe Institute, because I'm only about a 5-hour drive there. And that week, your episode on the Joe Rogan podcast came out. And I said, "Oh, lovely! I have a 5-hour drive. I can kill 3 of it, listening to Tom Campbell." And it was fantastic. It was absolutely incredible. And not to mention, I've seen several documentaries with you as a part of my training, becoming a Monroe Institute trainer. So I feel like so many synchronicities around me kind of propelled me to you. And here we are having conversation, which is, always mind blowing for me. But if I remember correctly, are you a World of Warcraft player?
My children were, particularly my son. I was a little old for that by the time that came out, but my son was a great World of Warcraft player. My daughters did a little bit, but they mainly just fiddled with it. But he was into it, he and some of his guy friends. So I've seen hours worth. I've been walking through where the computers were. I'd stop and I'd look and I'd ask him some questions, and he would tell me about it. So I'm pretty familiar with the World of Warcraft and how it works and so on. I know that's almost ancient history now when it comes to gaming. That was a long, long time ago. But my son now is getting close to being 40. So you can imagine he was like 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 when he was doing his World of Warcraft. So it's been a long time. But yeah, I'm not the player. I've never gotten into gaming. When I was a young man, the most advanced game that they had on video was Pong.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then a little bit after that, they had Space Invaders, but those were kind of crude arcade games. And by then I was too busy in my professional life and both sides of it, the physics and the consciousness research, to really have time for sitting down and playing video games.
That's very intriguing, because when I'm like sort of getting a sense of who you are from study perspective and learning sort of your model of reality, which I love, by the way, and I can't wait to get into that. You keep using this terminology of games. Like I think I wrote a quote from you just a couple hours ago, and it was really profound, because I'm a gamer. I'm a big gamer. Obviously, I'm closer to your son's age, and it was something to the effect of, we're all playing a multiplayer game seeking to level up, right?
Right. Well, I say this is this virtual reality. We live in a virtual reality, and our bodies are the avatars, and we are pieces of consciousness. And I call this virtual reality an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. Just like a flight trainer, for future pilots. You don't put a person in a $100 million airplane so they can learn how to fly it. You go in a trainer first. Well, this is a trainer for us, learning to become love, learning to make better choices, learning to not be so self-centered and so grabby, and it's all about me, and using other people for your own ends. That's an ethic that goes with materialism. That is unfortunate, but that's what kind of rules our society right now, is that materialistic ethic of control, power, force. Opposite to that, and my sense of the world, the reigning ethic is sharing, caring, cooperation. So it's the love side versus the fear side. But it turns out that the metaphor, using the metaphor of gaming and of virtual realities generated by computers, that turns out to be a pretty accurate metaphor for consciousness. Consciousness is nothing more than an information system. And that's pretty easy to understand because, think of what you and I are conscious of. Okay, we're sitting here and we see things, we hear things, and since we're so far apart, we don't smell each other, but we can feel the chair that we're sitting on, and if there's anything to smell here in our local places, then we do. So we have these five senses, and those five senses are our data input. And if you take those five senses away, what do you have left? What are you? What's your reality like? Well, you can't hear it, see it, smell it, taste it, or feel it. You are nothing but a point of consciousness floating in a black void, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, feeling nothing. So that is your data input. Now, the way consciousness works is it takes in data through its senses. For us, our five senses. It processes that data. It compares that data to what it has in memory. How did it change from the last moment? What's going on here? So it compares with memory, does some more processing, and then gives an output. What am I going to do about it? So I'm looking at something that I need to take action on. I intake the data, I process it, compare to memory, process it, have an output. That's what I do. I take action or do something. So that is the most fundamental definition of an information system. Takes in information, processes it, checks it with memory, and then processes it, and then has an output. So consciousness, awareness, is an information system in the way it functions. It functions like an information system. So using computers and computer games as a metaphor to explain consciousness is pretty accurate, actually. Not just a kind of a metaphor I dreamed up, that sort of, fits the bill, but it's really very accurate in the way the system works. Consciousness is an information system. And as an information system, it does all the things that your desktop computer does, except it's a lot bigger and a lot faster and a lot smarter, and it's conscious. It's not just a machine, it's an aware machine. So yeah, I use computer metaphors a lot. And when it comes down to how close is that metaphor to reality, it's pretty close.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in my personal belief, having a lifetime of experience with, I'll just say otherworldly beings and entities,
Mhm.
what I've come to understand is whatever the other is, meaning we could let's say in your terms like information systems, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe the larger consciousness system. Whatever this other is, I personally believe that it communicates to our consciousness through the filter of our understanding and our language. So it makes sense to me, and this is my interpretation, and I don't speak for you. It makes sense to me that whatever these um, bits of information about the other side, or the larger reality at play here beyond the physical,
Mhm.
it would make sense to you and communicate to you through the filter of your physicist and engineering brain. And I think that's brilliant how you've taken this entire computer digital language and you've formed it into a system that makes sense to someone like me, to someone who's a nerd, to someone who's a scientist, to someone who's a gamer. It makes sense.
Yeah, well, it makes sense to gamers more easily than it makes sense to older people.
Mm-hmm.
Older people who never played a virtual reality game, never put on a headset, they have a real hard time wrapping their mind around the concept that this physical reality of ours could be a virtual reality, because they say, this hard stuff here around me, and that's just couldn't be just a simulation. But for the younger people who have been there and been in simulations, they know that simulated world can be just as real as this one, and we've just begun. simulations that are really realistic are only about, I don't know, probably less than 10 years old. Before then, they weren't too realistic. So, in another 30 years, just think how realistic they're going to be. What was that movie, Ready Player One?
Hmm.
He had a suit he put on so he could get the touch. He could feel the pressure, and I don't know whether he got smells from that or not, but he obviously got sound, he got sight, and he got touch. I don't know that he got taste from that either, but the smell and the taste are the two minor, the minor senses for humans. The sight and the sound are the two major sensors for humans, and touch. So, yes, those who have experienced these video games don't find it that hard to wrap their mind around the fact that this could be a virtual reality, because that can be done. They've seen that potential. And as the technology that we have gets better and better, we're going to soon have AIs making up virtual realities with an individual human. The human's going to be sitting there, and the AI is going to start making the pictures, doing the graphics, and the players, and the human's going to be sitting there telling them what they're feeling and what they're thinking and what's in their mind to do. And the AI is going to be making that up, and you're going to have this human and an AI creating a whole session, a whole virtual reality together, just for the two of them. And it's going to be very, very real, because it's not somebody else's game that now they're learning how to use. It's going to be coming out of their own mind, and they'll be able to wrap their mind around this big paradigm shift that I have. But I think as time goes on, the paradigm shift is going to get easier and easier to make, and there'll be more and more people coming over to it. And I think within the next couple of decades, we'll see that the scientists will come over as well, and they will agree that this is a virtual reality, and that consciousness is a computer, because nothing else makes as good sense. Nothing else solves the paradoxes they have now. Science, metaphysics, philosophy, theology, they all have a bunch of paradoxes, things they think are true. They're experiments, and science tell them they're true, but they have no idea why they're true or how that comes about. They call those paradoxes. And there's a long list of those paradoxes that this model answers very logically and scientifically, and it doesn't add any new paradoxes. And it only has one assumption, and that's consciousness exists. So it's a pretty elegant model. And I think the scientists will come to it and realize that it's a better model, produces a better physics, a more general physics than what they have now. It'll help them understand quantum physics that in a way they don't understand now, and will help them understand relativity in a way they don't understand now. So it's coming. We just have to wait until this big paradigm leap of this being a virtual reality, this physical universe is a virtual reality, and us as a piece of consciousness. That big paradigm shift is hard now, but a decade from now, it won't be nearly so hard.
I completely agree. I think it's incredible to think about your life story and your legacy and this model of reality that you are building, because from everything I've studied in my entire life, it's completely enmeshed with different terminology, with things like, for example, the mystery schools used to talk about thousands of years ago, and they had a different understanding of things. So they would say something like, this is Maya, this is illusion, this is a dream. So it seems to me that through your direct experience doing the work of, whether it's out of body, whether it's meditation, whether it's this laundry list of things that you've achieved, that you are receiving true information from another place. And I think that's amazing and very fascinating. But what I'm curious about is if there was any sort of existential shock that you initially received.
No, none at all. I didn't ever get in a place where I felt uncomfortable or I didn't understand, or nothing that I would call shock. It's just been a learning experience. But on the other hand, to make that more understandable, most people who have come from where I started and ended up from where I am would have gone through some sort of shock along the process. But
Yeah, me.
but I didn't. because I came here for this job. I came here to do what I'm doing now, and everything just fit together like putting a glove on that's the perfect size. Everything fits very nicely. So there really wasn't any shock about it. It was just one step after the other. Now, when I was in graduate school finishing my thesis work for the PhD, is when I had a paranormal experience there of being able to debug code in a meditation state rather than actually looking at the printout. And at that time, I'd forgotten about my earlier adventures into consciousness. I'd forgotten all about those. And that was like not a shock, but a wow. Oh, look at this. I'm a physicist. I model reality. And look, there's another whole part of reality that has to do with consciousness that I don't know anything about. I'm going to start trying to find out about that. So I didn't find shock. I found an oh wow and an interest of moving forward and trying to learn more about it. So that from then on, it was just a matter of learning more and more as time went by. And I ended up learning about Bob Monroe, meeting him, becoming a co-worker with him for about 8 years. I spent 15 to 20 hours a week, myself and Dennis Menrick, electrical engineer. And we learned to go out of body and do all the paranormal things. And it, for me, it was all about trying to figure out how it worked, why it worked, what was going on. That's what physicists do. They model reality. They try to understand, how worlds work. So I was not shocked with any of it. We were out there doing all sorts of paranormal things every day. Matter of fact, we were so used to paranormal things happening that, people said, "Oh, did you write that down? Did you did you write a paper about that?" And it's like, no, that was just another day at the lab. We'd have the strangest, weird things happening hour by hour out there. So they weren't treated as being particularly special because they were within a context of strangeness that both Dennis and I learned to live with, on a daily basis. So there's many things that were lost there and not recorded, but a lot of it was recorded. You can still go to TMI and dig into their old library of the initial explorers, of which I was one of the first. Dennis and I were probably the first. And you can still listen to old audio tapes, which is rather amazing all by itself because Bob always bought the cheapest cassette tapes that he could find at Radio Shack. And that's what he recorded it all on. And I doubt that stuff had more than about a 10 or 15 year lifespan before that tape got brittle. So somebody took the time to copy it onto something better. And eventually it made it into the digital age, like 2 or 3 decades later when the digital age erupted. So it's still there. You can go there and listen to physicist TC talking about what he's experiencing while in an out of body state.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all there. Yeah, when I started working with Bob, it was almost a decade before TMI was born.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, it was Dennis found the concept of binaural beats in an old Scientific American done in the late 60s, and he and I then optimized it while Bob was, I think, doing a program at Esalen on the West Coast. And by the time he came back, that turned into his new technology. He incorporated along with his other sound that he had, was a kind of a surfy rolling sound. He put the two together, and that is where the idea of TMI came from, because so many people wanted to come and listen to it and get involved in it that for a while, Dennis and I and Nancy Lee, better known as Scooter to those who are out of TMI, we'd go off in an airplane and go someplace and 20 or 30 people would show up, or 40 people, and we'd lay out an audio harness down the middle of a big room, and they'd be laying, on their backs on air mattresses with the headset plugged in, and we'd do courses like that. We did that for a year or two, and so many people wanted to come that Bob got the bright idea of creating the Monroe Institute and having a place where people could come rather than us flying around with an audio harness. So that's really where the concept of TMI and binaural beats came from, was out of that thing. Bob took that sound, his original with the binaural beats that Dennis and I optimized, and had it had patented as hemisync. So that's the famous hemisync. And now I think Monroe has gone even past hemisync. They have other technologies now that they use that are also very effective. They have a new spatial technique that kind of moves things around in your head and gives you a sense of kind of being there in this other space, which is pretty effective of its own. So they haven't stood still. They've been creating and upgrading and doing things all along as well.
You just reminded me, and thank you for sharing all that, by the way. That's very fascinating. I just completed my training to become an outreach trainer, so it's cool to kind of hear this from you directly. It's very surreal a little bit, but when I just completed my first workshop this weekend, it was profound, and there were some profound things that occurred. People having a hard time staying in their body. Let's just say that, and there was a young lady. Just for the respect of anonymity, I won't say her name, but there was a young lady who for the last year was having very high states of anxiety. She thought there was something wrong with her heart. There's nothing wrong with her heart. We come to find out, she's been to the doctor many times over the last year and a half and everything's fine. And it's just anxiety. They're trying to put her on depression meds. And she's like, no, I don't think I should do that. And she keeps getting these vibrating sensations and this buzzing when her heart's beating. And she's like, not sure what's happening. Someone in her immediate environment, a close friend, says, it seems like this sounds like Kundalini awakening. And she's like, okay, sure. Long story short, we got to the root of that in the program, and she safely ventured out of the body, and it was a profound catharsis. And it was incredible just to be a part of this. And, so to hear this from you just days off of that experience is a blessing to me. And I wanted to say that one of the participants brought me a cassette. I didn't think to bring it up in the room, but maybe I can drop a picture in. But they brought me an actual cassette tape from 1973 that they found in an archive somewhere at a university or an organization somewhere of Bob Monroe giving a lecture about ESP, or it's an ESP conference at Mary College on out-of-body travel. So I actually have this, and I'm going to bring it to the Institute and have them catalog it. But I'm curious. I wonder if you would have even been there.
73? Yep, I was there. 73. I started working with Bob probably late 71, early 72, in that range. That's when I started going out. So in 73, I would have been a fixture out there. Dennis and I both would have been. But Bob did travel around. His book made a big splash. So he was invited to speak here and speak there. And there was a constant stream of visitors coming through Whistlefield Farm. That's where he lived at that time. It's a different place altogether than where TMI is now. But there was lots of visitors of all sorts would come and want to talk to Bob and experience the sound that he had created and go out of body and that sort of thing. So that book created a pretty big stir. I think at that time in the early 70s, people were ready for something new and something kind of taking a great leap forward. So it kind of resonated. Then we got away from that. By the time we started going into the 80s and 90s, it started going the other way. By the time I published my big TOE trilogy in 2003, me and maybe 2 or 3 other scientists thought virtual reality was a really good idea, and everybody else thought it was crazy. So now it's coming back. Now, Monroe is full. They're bursting at the seams with people and things to do. And there was a time, 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. They were desperately hanging on by a thread, trying to just make it through the year and still pay salaries. So it's gone through good times and lean times. And right now is a real good time for TMI. They're doing really, really well. So that makes me feel good. I'm pleased about their success.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. And they're, like you said, they're bursting at the seams. But in today's age, as you said, virtual reality is a hot concept. And now your book is making a big splash. So I want to shift back to you for a bit, if that's okay. So when I asked the question about existential shock, the reason I asked this is because when I started having my experiences with light orb phenomenon or beings from other realities, as a young child growing up in the Pentecostal faith, it was very shocking to me. And I always believed it and accepted it. but it was hard for me to reconcile two belief systems at once. So I was just curious about if you had experienced any existential shock being a physicist, being an engineer, having a career at NASA for a time, and then starting to have these sort of, you could say, profound, I say mystical lightly, but mystical experiences, revelations of other realities and things of this nature. So I'm glad to know you didn't. In my experience, meeting engineers and scientists, they tend to be the most shocked. Um, you know what I mean? So,
Yes, they would be, because they have a very hard belief
mm-hmm.
in materialism. When you have a hard belief in materialism and determinism, then it's hard to go there. It's even, a determinist, a materialist has to be also a determinist. Those two are logically necessary for each other. You don't even admit that there is such a thing as consciousness, or such a thing as time, or such a thing as free will. So in their mind, the world, there's no time, no consciousness, no free will. And now you're talking about all the things that consciousness does. You see, it's kind of outside of their reality, outside of their mental space that they can even get into. So they mostly just brush it off as nonsense. They won't even listen to it. And that'll change. That's it was Max Planck who, when they talked about quantum physics in the early 1900s, like 1915 to 1925 was basically when quantum mechanics was created. They got a lot of pushback from the older crowd that says, that's crazy. The world can't work like that. It's probability, doesn't belong in physics. Physics is a solid world, and Newton had it right, and you guys are nuts. But so Max Planck wrote a line that I've always enjoyed, and he said, physics goes forward one funeral at a time. Yeah, and I always thought that was fun. Of course, he was kind of tongue in cheek, to saying that, but still, that's true. The old guard who are set in their beliefs eventually pass on, and the young people who aren't so set in those beliefs start seeing the world in a different light.
Yeah.
And that's just the way the world works. So yes, you'll find the physicists, the old people particularly, but the younger people who've been taught by the old also believe that. So it's in transition now. The physicists kind of know that reality is information based, but they don't have any idea what to do with that. They don't know where to go with it, because if they said that out loud, even though they talk among themselves and say, reality is information based, but if they talked out loud, then that leads to the conclusion that this is a virtual reality. And if they said that out loud, somebody would say, oh, well, then who programmed it and why? If it's a virtual reality, there's a computer. Where's the computer and who's the programmer? And the physicists just don't have an answer for that. So they don't want to go there. So even though they say that reality is information based, they stop right there, because taking the next step will set them up for questions that they can't answer and that they deem to not even be science. So that's kind of a dead end for them. But eventually they'll see the light, that there is a path through that concept that is still really good physics and very logical and science. They don't have to disown it because it's consciousness based and therefore not science. Consciousness is what's fundamental.
I believe in duality and in all levels of being, in a sense, right? And I think that truth, just objective truth that can't be refuted, lies somewhere in the merging of, we could say, and I say quotes, right? But spiritual phenomenon, mystical, or, you could say it's like consciousness. I think they're all the same thing, right? So somewhere between science and consciousness, when they merge, that's where I believe truth lies. And I think for every genuine phenomenon that exists in any reality, if we have the right tools, there must be a way to observe it. There must be a way to measure it. It's real, right? For it to be real, it has to be observable.
Absolutely. I have the exact same ideas as that. And that's one of the things my model of reality does. It unites the spiritual with the physical. It shows how all of that is really the same thing, different aspects, different subsets of the very same thing. So that's why I called it a big toe, the theory of everything, because it really is. You can derive quantum physics and relativity from first principles of consciousness. If you really understand consciousness, then relativity and quantum physics fall out as necessary. You can derive them. So the objective world of science and the subjective world of mind are just two different sides of the very same coin. It's all one coin, but there's, you can look at the one side or you can look at the other, but they're both there. And that's it's going to be a big paradigm shift for people to get through, because right now, particularly the scientists have built a really big wall between themselves and anything that has to do with consciousness or spirit or soul. All of those things are on the other side of the wall, and they say, well, science doesn't go there. All of our science stays over here on the objective side, and anything over there is not science. It's just all BS and what they call woo-woo. It's all woo-woo over there.
Mm-hmm.
But this theory of mind, or this understanding of mind, a better way to say it, basically takes that wall down and says, no, they're all one thing. They're all piece parts of a bigger thing, and that's consciousness. And consciousness and soul, consciousness and spirit are all the same thing. It's that force that animates us from the inside. It's who we are. We're not just a body. We're a mind. We're conscious. We make choices. We grow. We change, and that component of us is all on the non-physical side. That's consciousness. The physical side, that's computed. So the model kind of does that. So you're right. The truth lies in the understanding that the world of spirit and paranormal and all things conscious and all things mind is really more fundamental than the physical side. The physical side is just that spiritual side creating a virtual reality for us to play in, for us to make choices in, because we need choices in order to evolve. In order to grow, we need to make choices. If we make good choices on the side of love, we evolve our consciousness, raise the quality of our consciousness. We make choices on the side of fear, that's the side of chaos and tearing things apart, then we de-evolve. So it needed a virtual reality for us to experience in, because otherwise our experience was like the experience of a big chat room, and that doesn't have a lot of traction for growing up. It doesn't have real consequential choices that you have to make. Whereas this reality has a very tight rule set called physics and chemistry and biology. And every exchange creates choices. If you do something, what you choose to do, your choice, that will affect other people, because you live in a social system, and what you do, what you choose to do, affects others. And then what they do is affected by you, and it affects others yet. So everybody's an actor, and that ripple of causality kind of flows out from all of us. So we're all interacting with our own ripple and everybody else's ripple. And that's what we have in the social system. And in a social system, lowering entropy is the same as becoming love. It's caring, sharing, cooperation. So that's the key thing. That's why we're here. That's why we are the players of the human avatar. We're the consciousness. We are immortal. We go on. The body dies, but we don't die. We are consciousness. The body is just a computed player that gives us choices to make. And by those choices, we evolve or de-evolve. And if you think about a virtual reality game like World of Warcraft or any of the more modern ones, actually more like No Man's Sky, that's more of the same kind of idea. And that is, nothing's computed unless somebody's looking at it. And nothing has to be saved, because it all just comes back with a set of random numbers. So that's the way our reality works. And if you're inside a virtual reality, let's say you're a barbarian inside of World of Warcraft, well, if that barbarian, if he could think about where's the computer computing this, where's the player playing this, that barbarian would have to conclude that the computer and the player were outside of the virtual reality. They're non-physical. So the player and the computer have to be non-physical from the viewpoint of the avatars inside the virtual reality. So here we are, we think we're physical human beings, and guess what? The player and the computer are invisible. They're not of the same reality. They're not matter-based. They're beyond matter-based. They're non-physical. The computer is consciousness, and is a piece of consciousness, and we're a piece of consciousness. So consciousness is the fundamental reality, and this is a virtual reality. That's kind of how that works out.
I love that. I completely agree. And as I'm looking into your model of reality, I understand that you have not only from a lifetime of, being a physicist, engineer, and then of course in your early days starting kind of going off the deep end, so to speak, into this at the Institute and then continuing forth. I understand that you came to these conclusions through direct personal experience.
Yes.
But when I think of Tom Campbell as a young man getting started into these things, I'm very curious about what belief system you had in place before. I'm curious about your evolution. I know what you've come to believe, but I'm curious the journey. Does that
Okay.
make sense? Is that
Sure.
question?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you're young, you don't have much of a big picture.
Hmm.
Your picture's pretty small. It's just about what you're going to eat tonight, and where you're going to go tomorrow, and how
Hmm.
you're going to get your homework done on time. And, your reality is pretty much just small. But I was kind of a big picture thinker from the beginning. And sometime around, I don't know, I'd probably say 14, 15, I decided that, religion was full of belief, and that belief really didn't make sense to believe things. That your reality needed to be based on your experience, and that I had no experience to substantiate any of the things that were in religion. So I let that go. And by 14, I was an atheist and thought that religion was nonsense. So I had that opinion starting, but I didn't have any beliefs. So I didn't have any beliefs that, this is the way reality is. Always I don't really know how reality is, but I'll find out as I grow up, I guess, through experience. So when things like I'm in graduate school and I find out in a meditation state, I can, debug my software so much easier than I can actually sitting down at a desk looking at the printout. And I'm not too surprised about that. It's like, oh, look at this. There's another part of reality that I didn't know about. So I didn't have any major shocks because I didn't get ingrained with any, beliefs, tightly held beliefs. Well, I did. My family had their own beliefs, but I was always a person that marched to the beat of my own drum. So I went off in my own mind, and I stayed that way. I probably continued the idea of being an atheist until I realized that was also a belief. Yeah. And that whether you believe in a positive sense or believe in a negative sense, it's all belief, and it's not a good place to be. So then I switched from atheist to agnostic and said, well, don't really care too much, because I'm just living my life, doing the best I can, trying to be ethical, trying to be good, trying to be right, trying to do the things that seem, like they're good things to do, and it'll all take care of itself. Then as I learned to meditate, learned to go out of body, started to study the paranormal and how does it work and why does it work that way, and eventually grew up to the point that I kind of understood a lot about how the world worked. Then I had to laugh at myself. I said, you've thrown religion under the bus all these years for being irrational, and now you're coming all the same basic concepts that the world's religions have had, from the beginning of time. So here you are, and the Buddha says that it's all Maya, it's all an illusion, and so did all the other big spiritual leaders that created organizations called religions. They all had pretty much the same idea that love is the answer, fear is the problem, um, that there is a what a you know that what is it? The idealists were correct. There is a, reality is created in something outside of us, that the physical world is not really the real thing. It's a
Mhm.
shadow of the real thing, but there's something outside of us that is more real.
Like Plato.
Yeah, Plato and his cave analogy of the cave, right? So, I had gotten to the place on my own through my own experience where now I understood the fundamentals of all those religions, Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and Christianity and the Muslims, and all of that started about the same, from the same idea. But then it grew and ended up not being spiritual as much as it was religion. There's a big difference between spirituality and religion. Religion is an organization. It's an organization, and like all organizations, it's got buildings, it's got real estate, it's got a whole lot of other issues on its mind besides spirituality. It's a social club. It serves a lot of different purposes. It's a counseling organization. It helps people understand and feel better about themselves and see their place in the universe. So it's got a lot of features to it, but a lot of it really is only slightly connected to real spiritual growth. Some people can get all their spiritual needs met in religion, but they're the ones that forget about the dogma, forget about memorizing this and that. They just see it as an ethical and moral viewpoint in the world of how to treat other people. You treat people as like you'd like to be treated. You turn the other cheek whenever you can. It's that kind of a love-based idea, and that's kind of the spiritual side of it. That's not the how much money do we have to collect to pay the mortgage, on the building side of it. So I laughed at myself for a couple of weeks. Aha! After all these years, I come finally back to the place that I had said was a bunch of foolishness to start with, and that is that love is indeed the answer. Yes, there is another reality that is kind of the fundamental reality, and this is not, and so on. So I've come full circle there, but none of it was a shock. All of it was just I'd learn things, and as I'd learn things, I'd say, "Oh, okay, got to leave that and take a bigger step," and then I'd leave that one and take the next bigger step. So no shock, no big surprises, mostly humor. So instead of existential crisis, I maybe had some existential laughs, about the where I have been and the beliefs that I had taken on from my culture and in opposition to my culture, and that all of that was nonsense. I needed to let belief go completely. It's not about belief. Belief is the enemy. Belief is a problem. You need to not believe anything. You should always be skeptical of everything. And the person you have to be most skeptical about is yourself, because we are very good at convincing ourselves that we are a lot smarter than we are, and that we know a lot more than we do. So that it's good to have humility about who we are and what we do, and it's good to share, but it's not good to push. So that's kind of where I came from and how I got through all of this. But now I started life as a very right-brained, intuitive. I was probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and I was chanting, and things like that. It just came normal to me. My sister and I would sit in the back of a car. My parents were going on maybe on a vacation or a long trip, and you know how it is with kids, 10 minutes away from the house, and they start saying, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Because they're bored. They don't have anything to do. They're stuck in the back of a car. So I had a technique. I just made up a little chant in my own mind that just seemed right to me. And I'd sit down and start to chant. And 10 minutes later, I'd wake up and 4 hours had gone by and we were at our destination.
Wow.
And it seemed like no time had happened at all. I just drop out of the reality for a while and come back. So I was very right-brained as a kid. I had a bigger picture. I had an intuitive sense that mind could modify reality. I had little I had a tree behind my house that dropped little things like buckeyes, little bean kind of things. And in my own mind, I made up this thing that if you tossed it up in the air and made a wish and then caught it, the wish would come true. So I would be sometimes sitting in the car with my dad, and he'd be driving, and I'd be trying to make all the lights be green. So I'd toss my bean up, and that red light up ahead is going to turn green before we get there. And sometimes I could get like 7, 8, 10 green lights in a row. So I knew that it was, that you could modify probability with an intent, but I had it related to magic, and flipping beans, and I made up those stories because that was the only explanation I could come up with. But I had lots of things happen like that. I had a pair of pants that were too big for me, sitting in a closet waiting for me to grow into them, and I could always find money in them. And
Wow.
I'd find money in them, and I'd take the money, and I knew if I looked too often, there wouldn't be any there. I had to wait. So 3 or 4 months later, there's more money in the pocket. 3 or 4 months later, so that's how I collected all my money for Christmas. In those
Amazing.
days, I collected like $20, and that was enough for me to buy presents for a whole family. That was that was a long time ago when things didn't cost so much, but yeah, and I understood that Bob Monroe had a similar thing. He had something that he always found money in. So it's just a thing that you interact with the larger conscious system in ways that it gives you to help you understand a bigger sense of reality. So I was a mystical little guy, and then I also had the knowledge that I had to develop my left brain logical process, that I had to go into science or engineering or something that forced logical left brain thinking. So I did, and that's what I had to do. And I found it hard at first. It was very difficult, but the more I worked on it, the easier it got. And by the time I was, getting out of graduate school, well, math was easy. I could do all those things very easily, but it was a struggle. I struggled with mathematics for a long time until I probably got into college, and halfway through college, and it started to get easier and easier and easier as I went. But like I say, by the time I was out of graduate school, that was my career. I was doing math for a living, and it got to be simple because finally I understood it. There wasn't any magic involved. It's just the logic of quantity. So you learn what the logical steps are, and once you got that logical structure, the rest of it is just deduction, and it's not that hard to do. I kept trying to understand the meaning behind it. What does this mean? And that's the wrong way to look at it. You have to say, what does this logic point to? It doesn't have a particular meaning. It just has this logic that's embedded inside itself. And you just have to see, what's the logic of the rules here? If I apply the rules this way, what does the logic tell you? And once I saw it like that as a tool, then it started to get a lot easier rather than trying to ferret out its significance at a deeper level. There was no significance at a deeper level. It was just logic. And the logic could be right or wrong. If you had a wrong statement or a wrong piece in your logic, then the whole thing would be bad. So anyway, so that's kind of my trip through mental space, and there wasn't any big shocks or any big changes. It just one thing led to the next, and like I say, I came here with this as a goal. So it was like, walking into a closet and finding that all the clothes fit just perfectly.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. So even at a young age, you were, for lack of better words, using your intention to uh, alter reality.
Yes, I was, and I just intuitively knew that worked. And nobody told me that. I didn't read about it. I wasn't able to read yet. I was probably still pre-reading, but I just knew that was the case. But I needed some kind of mechanism to make it to make it less abstract. At that age, you can't deal with abstract information very well. You need something to make it more concrete for you. So my lucky beans were the things that made it. And nobody told me that. Nobody said, "Oh, with those beans," I didn't hear that anywhere. I just made it up because it seemed like a good way of harnessing this ability to modify future probability with intent.
Perhaps tossing the bean was just some arbitrary ritual that you were doing unconsciously to harness the power of your intent.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
exactly what it was. It was just something that made it into a concrete ritual, a thing to do, and eventually I gave up the bean and figured and realized that you didn't need the bean, but that's what I started with anyway. It's just a little thing that I did, and I found that it worked.
Yeah.
I could change things. That it worked. Didn't work all the time, but it worked a lot of the time,
That's
more than
amazing.
half the time.
So, listening to your story and sort of getting the scope of your whole life, and then obviously knowing what's going on with you today, and it's sort of full circle for me because for the last year, I've been going through the Monroe Institute thing, and then I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but part of like the gateway, and especially part of being trained to be a trainer, you are exposed to multiple documentaries, which of course you are in because you are like foundational to the formation of this place. You can't talk early Monroe without talking Tom Campbell. That's just not really possible, right? So, and then that journey for me culminated with um meeting you at side games, which
Mhm.
was amazing. So I'm really happy that our paths have crossed. But anyway, let me take one step back. So what I was saying was meeting you, hearing about you for a year, getting to have this conversation with you and sort of seeing the scope of your life, I get the sense that this it makes sense to me now. No existential shocks. You were born to do this. As a child, you're flipping magic beans. You're already unconsciously, honing your will to manipulate reality, cause glitches in the system. It seems that it came naturally for you. So I'm curious if there have been out of body experiences and or past life memories or some sort of direct revelation that you've received about like this being your purpose here, this being something that you came here to do.
Well, not not very much. Now, I did have a few things. Like I knew fairly early on, probably by the time I was in my 30s, early 40s, maybe around your age, I knew that I was going to write books, had something to do with books. And I thought, well, that's odd. I'm a scientist. I'm not a writer. I'm not an English major. That's not my strong point. But I knew that that's where I was gonna have to go. I was supposed to write books. And then I thought, well, maybe it wasn't write books. Maybe it was doing something else with books. So I didn't know solidly where it was going or what it was going to be about. I didn't know that. But I did know that I would end up having to write books about something. And I really didn't have much of an idea about what. Once when I was maybe in my yeah, middle to late 30s, I did ask the question, and I always had beings. I call them beings, but then they were just minds, just other minds I could talk to. And I'd had these all along. My whole life I thought everybody had these connections with mind that you could get answers from. And and I had these, and one time I asked, I said, well, what is it? What is it I'm going to do? Now, I'd already been going to Bob Monroe for probably 5 or 6, 7 years. I wasn't quite done with that yet, but and I asked, I said, well, what am I going to, where's this all going? Where's it going to take me? And I got the picture, and it basically described what it is I'm doing now. And I thought, that's crazy. I'm not going to end up doing all of that. That's a bigger deal than I am. But it ended up that way anyway. So I got some glimpses of it. I didn't take it too seriously because, again, belief is the enemy. Don't believe anything. I got it and I thought about it, but I didn't really know what to make of it. So I just let it kind of sit on the side. It didn't drive me, or I didn't even think about it that much. But yes, I got bits and pieces of it all along, kind of pointing me in the right direction. But I actually got down to writing, and I didn't intend to write a book. I just got down to somebody asked me, said, Tom, how does reality work? And I spent till that was probably about 8 o'clock in the evening, 4 o'clock in the morning. I still was stammering over it, trying to tell this guy how reality worked. And I realized there was a lot of holes in my theory. Yeah, I didn't have it all put together yet, and I needed to write it down so that it would force clarity. We all think fuzzy thoughts. Most of our thoughts are not that precise. But when you have to write something, you have to get precision. You have to get clarity, because a fuzzy sentence is obvious. A fuzzy thought's not obvious at all. We don't even notice that it's fuzzy. But once we write it down, if it's not clear, it's pretty obvious. So I said, well, I'll write this down. It'll help me organize the thoughts. And I did. And it came up, it was 8 pages long, 8.5 pages long. So I showed it to some people, and their eyes rolled up in their heads, and they said, that doesn't make sense. You got to explain that better. So I added to it, and I added to it, and I added to it, and I handed it out to people, and they said, well, what about this? And what about that? So I added to it, and eventually I had so much material, it couldn't be one book. It was too much. So I broke it into 3 books. That's how the books got written. So it wasn't because I was motivated by a drive to write a book. So I sat down and wrote it. It just happened organically. And then after I was done, I said, oh yeah, that's this book thing I was supposed to do. Okay. Check that one off. I finally know what that's about. So everything just happened in my life pretty organically. One thing just slid into the next, and so on, because I had the larger consciousness nudging me all along, nudging me to talk to this guy and tell him what reality's like. Oh, you've got a lot of holes in your story. There's a bunch of stuff you don't really understand. You ought to write that down and think about it. So writing the book took me 5 years. And part of that was because I had to figure a lot of things out. I still didn't have all the answers that made it logical. And then I wrote it for other logical people, because people who deal in poetry that you have to interpret, they have lots and lots of books about spirituality, but there wasn't any books out there that would take a left brain, logical process kind of person and lead them to spirituality.
Right.
That didn't exist. So I wanted my book to be something that people who were logical could read and just follow the logic, and they'd end up in consciousness and spirituality and love, and all the rest of that stuff would suddenly come alive in a rational, logical way, not in a belief-based way, or it's kind of an esoteric or mystical way, but it would be solid. Rationality would get you there. So that was one of my goals for the book. I'd go back, I'd write something, and I'd read it and say, yeah, well, if a bunch of physicists were reading this, or other left brain people, what would they get caught on? What would they say? That doesn't make sense. And then I'd explain it in a way that it did make sense. So that was my purpose in writing the book, was to make an on-ramp for the logical process people to find, the nature of reality for themselves in a logical way. So my books appeal to logical people everywhere. The MBT crowd, probably the majority is Christian, because I happen to speak English, and in the English-speaking countries, that's kind of the dominant religion. But I have a lot of atheists and Buddhists and Hindus and Taoists, and even some shaman from indigenous tribes. They all kind of join, and the kind of the mystical schools from all over, kind of say, yeah, that's, I've been, they'd say, I've been studying the Kabbalah for the last 15 years. And MBT sounds just exactly like my Kabbalah teacher, was telling me, or I've been studying Taoism for the last 20 years, and MBT is exactly what, they're teaching me. So I had that happen over and over again. So it's true. It fits everybody.
It does. I asked ChatGPT today, because I was trying to get creative, and I said, let me tell you exactly what I said. This is interesting. I said, can you compare Tom Campbell's model of reality in My Big Toe to all of the ancient esoteric traditions? And it gave me a chart on the terminology that you use and the model of reality that you present. And it's pretty much all of the ancient mystery schools like Hermeticism Hinduism or Vedanta, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Theosophy, Egyptian, Orphic, and Eleusinian mystery schools. They're all saying the same thing thousands and
Mhm.
thousands of years ago with different terminology. So that's one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you, because I love that this information that you're presenting it's pertinent for the modern age, and it's presented through a lens of, science, digital terminology, video game, virtual reality, but it's not new information. And I think that's a good thing because it's real. And there are other sources of information that can back this with different terminology. The thing they all have in common, if I may say, though, is direct experience brings this revelation or this knowledge.
Absolutely. And that's why that knowledge has been there. It's ancient. That's because all you need to do to figure this out for yourself is have enough time to sit down and be with yourself.
Yeah.
Be with your mind, get to know who you are, and then learn to let that mind be, to not be trapped by your beliefs. So if you take somebody 3,000 years ago and they had enough time to sit under a banyan tree and think about big thoughts, then eventually they'd understand it, they'd figure it out, because it's the nature of our reality. It makes sense and it's logical. So yeah, you have all these different people, but then humans, pieces of consciousness playing humans, have this idea that they experience something, so they need to describe it, not only to themselves but to other people. Otherwise, it's just fuzzy stuff in their head. So the thing they have to do is put it into language. Well, when you put something into language, it's a bit of a problem, because language has been created by humans to describe the physical world and to also describe some feelings,
True.
but feelings in the physical world. So you're going to take this language that was meant to describe here in this universe, and you're going to try to explain things that are beyond this universe, things that are consciousness, non-physical things. And there is no space, that sort of thing. There's no spatial thing. You don't have conscious taking up this much space. Space isn't a concept there. Space is only a concept in this virtual reality, and it's a mathematical concept. So you to try to take these ideas and the experiences that you have and translate them into your native language and explain them to other people. We have this attitude that, well, we'll make up a story, the best story we can make up in terms of our language and our understanding in this physical world. We'll make up a story, and that's what we'll tell ourselves. That's what we'll tell other people. But we make up stories based on metaphors that make sense to us then. We use the metaphors then. Well, the Buddha said that this is all an illusion. Well, I don't know what he said, but it was translated many, many years later. It was translated into, this is all Maya, an illusion. He probably didn't use that word illusion, but something that was translated as that. And
Yeah.
I come to the viewpoint it's a virtual reality. Well, what's the difference between an illusion and a virtual reality? That's basically
Zero.
that's basically the same thing. And that was true of all these schools. They saw that the fundamental world was a world of consciousness, a world of spirituality, a world of the mind. It was of the mind, not of the physical. It wasn't made out of dirt and rocks and trees and flesh. It was made out of thought and ideas and concepts and feelings. So they knew all this, and they all described it in their own metaphors that meant something to them. And most of the metaphors tended to be metaphors that were made with words that were meant to describe things, not non-physical things, physical things.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all these differences between them. And if somebody doesn't really understand, they think they're all very different. These different schools, well, the Zen Buddhists and the Hindus, they're totally different. No, if you understand what they're saying, if you can interpret the poetry that they've written, then you realize, as you said, they're all saying the same thing. It's all basically the same thing. because that's what they actually experience. So anybody at any time in any part of the world, if they are not overwhelmed by their own beliefs, if they can be open-minded and just explore, that's what they'll end up with. They'll
Yep.
come to the very same conclusion that the Buddha came to. It's available. All you have to do is open yourself to it. It's consciousness, your consciousness. It's there. Now, I didn't channel any of this. I didn't get told any of this. I didn't get to say, Tom, here's the way the world works. Be sure you get that right. Go down and write it down in a book. I didn't get that at all. I had to figure it all out from scratch, every tiny piece of it. I wasn't told any of it, because if it was something that was told to me, it wouldn't be mine. I wouldn't own it. I wouldn't be able to really understand it. I just have to believe it. You can believe it or not believe it. It's not your experience, then it's not your truth. So I had to figure it all out from inside of me every step of the way, so that wherever I got to, it was mine. I could explain it. I could live it. I could be it. But if it's something that's told to you, now you can only act it. Okay. It's told you should be kind. All right. Well, I'll go out and act kind. Well, that's nice. That's civilizing, but it won't help you grow up in it. You have to be kind, not just act kind. So to be kind, you have to learn to be kind from the inside out. It's not a lesson you can get from the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
So these people who have figured this out in the past, they've basically gone through the same thing I've gone through. I've gone through the same thing they've gone through. It's just an unraveling of things that you wonder about. How does this work? How does that work? Why is it this way? How do paranormal things work? That was one of the things I started with. I wanted to explain the paranormal. And eventually I did explain all the paranormal things. I know how they all work, and what makes them work, and why they work sometimes and don't others, and that sort of thing. So it's available to anybody with the time to sit down and think about it long enough to come to these conclusions, and to start with no beliefs. Start with a blank slate, and then try to understand what's important and why. And one step after another leads you to the same place that all of these mystical schools have gotten to. They've all gotten the same place. And it's not that they copied each other. They all got there on their own. I didn't copy any of them either. I got there on my own. So that's the way it is. And there's probably tens of thousands of people that have gotten there on their own too. People like yourself, you've had to get there on your own, and you got kind of thrown in the middle of a mess and had to figure it all out, but because you had to get there on your own, you understand it. You've got it. It's something that you've unraveled. If it's just you read a book and they told you what was going on, that's not good enough. You have to live it and be it. And that's what we all have to do. And we have to do it for ourselves. That's our point of being here.
Spoken like a true mystic, spoken like a true scientist, and a true philosopher. I am incredibly inspired by our conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an incredible honor for me, and I will always cherish this conversation. And I hope, because as you said earlier, your book was published around 2003.
Yeah, it was 2003 in February.
And here we are 22 years later, and it's having this massive resurgence into the world. So I hope you really, you deserve that. And I really hope that you just feel happy about that, and the success and the love that your work is getting in today's age where AI is growing, and the world is so crazy and it doesn't know what to believe. So I think your book is a light in a dark place. And who knows, maybe I'm just saying that because I've been going on this path, and you and me are underground and the rest of the world still have a little while before they figure this out. But I think we're getting really close, right?
I think we're getting close, yes. And I think that's why we have all the paranormal and UFO stuff going on, because that's just the larger consciousness system way of kicking us out of the rut. We kind of get our minds in a rut where we think we know everything and have done everything, and materialism is the way it has to be, etc. And we just need to be kicked out of that rut with something that is different, open our minds a crack into the world being vastly different than we thought it was, whether that's a UFO thing or something else. It opens the mind. Once the mind's open, and it's easy to insert other ideas.
Mhm.
But getting the mind open in the first place is one of the hard things, and that's what's been going on. And right now we're in an era of minds opening because we have gotten to this point. Humanity has gotten to a point where it has to make choices. We have really big choices ahead of us. We can make good choices on the side of love and progress to a place where our life here on this planet is a much kinder, gentler, more productive process. Everybody everybody's important. Everybody's valuable. And we can make poor choices and go backwards and de-evolve back into, control, power, force, the ethic of materialism. We can go back to that. That's what we've been in. We've been trying to outgrow control, power, force, but if we can go backwards, that's a possibility too. So we're kind of balanced on this knife edge between going off the positive side or going off the negative side. And right now, the larger consciousness system is pulling out a lot of the stops to try to energize people to see a bigger picture. And you are part of that process, and your dad's part of that process. I'm part of that process, and 10,000 other people are also part of that process. And it's a big move to help humanity get it right this time, which is the first time the human race has ever had an opportunity to take some big steps forward. We couldn't before. The Buddha had it figured out, but the Buddha got up on a rock and maybe 100 people could hear him because otherwise you're too far back in the crowd. You couldn't hear what he said. Now somebody says something important, 5 billion people will hear it the next day.
Yeah.
It's different. This is a very different space, and we were very separate groups. And if a tidal wave or an earthquake killed 100,000 people someplace, we didn't even know where that place was. We never heard of it. Who cares? Wasn't us. We didn't have any sense of it being significant or important. And now we do. So humanity's kind of become a family rather than, a bunch of scattered relatives someplace that we really don't care about. It's become more of a family, more up close and personal because of our communications. And that means that together in mass, we can make some big steps if we get it right. If we regress back into, totalitarianism or something like that, then, well, evolution is very strong and it's relentless. We'll have to just work our way back up. If we dig a hole for ourselves now, it'll just take another decade or two to work back out of that hole, but we will. Eventually, we'll get there, So yes, we'll get to that kinder, gentler place to live in eventually. Whether we get to it in the next couple of decades or whether it's the next century or the next millennia, that's yet to be known. But we have the potential to get to it in the next decade or two, maybe 3 at the most. We have the potential to get there if we just make better choices now. The system is trying very hard to help us do that. So a lot of the things that are happening in your world that you had to struggle with growing up, those are things that have been orchestrated to help wake up people from their rut of thinking that there's nothing here but just us. Nobody in here but us chickens, and we're all we're all programmed already. Don't need to think any big thoughts. So that's the wake-up call is happening all over the place. That's why Monroe is so busy now. They've got lots of things going because a lot of people are starting to wake up and say, what's going on here? What are we doing? There has to be a better way. This control, power, force ethic is just not working. It's not a good system. What else is there? So when people start thinking like that, then we have potential for a movement. And a movement has the potential to actually change the way people see reality. And that has the capacity to get rid of control, power, force, or at least change it into something like love, caring, cooperation, being helpful. And that's where we need to go. So that's really what it's all about.
I completely agree. I think you're absolutely right. It's love and it's fear. And that's actually the message that my father received from the beings. There's only love and fear when we talk about, our choices.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think we're on the same page. And thank you for everything that you said. And I completely agree that there's me and there's you and there's maybe 10,000 others who are coming here to fulfill that very role of trying to help people get out of that rut. And I think we all can play this role once that switch is flipped. And it's
Mhm.
like I like what you say about entropy, low entropy versus high entropy beings. And I'm not necessarily I'm not a Freemason. I'm not endorsing Freemasonry, but it reminds me of the motto out of chaos order. And I
Mhm.
think I think that's a basic rule of reality. And all we can really do is just help people be more kind, be more loving. We could say God, we could say larger consciousness system, we could say spirit. But for me, the big mission is help other people have direct experience with that. So
That is correct. That's the mission. That's what we're here for. So when you get all this wrapped up and edited or whatever, please send a copy of it to MBT Events. They put videos up. So after you put it up and it's made its splash, if you would give it to us, I'd like to put it up on my site,
okay.
and that might help. That may help you in some ways. I don't have a huge site, but I've got about 125,000 subscribers that will then see your stuff, and some of them will come over and see more of your stuff.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. You
yeah,
said
so it's a good thing to do to share.
okay. I appreciate that. So, any last thoughts on your heart that you want to get out there before we close out, or do we feel at peace?
Well, we're at peace. I think what we just said is really the wrap up, that I'd say that the whole point is to outgrow the control power force and let that die, a death that it deserves, and instead to pick up the caring, sharing, cooperation, collaboration. Let's work together.
Unity.
Everybody's important. There's no people to throw away. It's not that you know the big people, the few, the 5% that own 95% of all the resources. That's not the way the world should be. The world
Right.
should be humanity. We all float our boats in the same way at the same time. We take care of each other. That's the idea. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, but that'll take a miracle or two. But we've got a couple of miracles or two up our sleeves in the sense that it makes sense. And all we have to do is get a majority, well, not even a majority, 10% of the human beings. What's that? A billion humans, 10% of the human beings to understand this, and the rest will all come along, because that 10% will be happier, they'll smile more, they'll be satisfied, their lives will be good, they will prosper, and the other side that is still in control power force will be miserable and struggling. Even if you've got $100 billion, you can still be miserable and struggling. It's not about the money. That's not what makes you valuable. It's the quality of what's inside of you is what makes you valuable.
Hmm.
That's what makes you happy. That's where you find, your own significance is there, not in how much control and power and force you wield. That is irrelevant. So when we make that transition, all the all the institutions that are problems now, corporations, governments, all the institutions will just change. We don't have to overrun them and, get rid of all the people that are in them. They'll just change because they're of the people. They're made of humans just like us. Well, we're consciousness, but you know what I mean. They're made of the human avatars just like we are. And as we change, those things will all change by themselves. So there's a there's a very beautiful world out there waiting us to make better choices, and that's all we have to do is just be aware of our choices, and we'll be able to, at least if we don't make it, our children and our grandchildren will live in that better, more kind, more productive world, and we'll live there with the AIs. And we and the AIs will get along really well. There's lots of positive ways that you can look at the AI taking over many things. Many jobs they can do better than we can do.
I agree.
So there's a very positive outcome of all of that. You don't have to see that as doom and gloom. It's actually very positive. So we'll manage to get there, but like always, we'll stumble and we'll go backwards a little, go forwards a little more, and it'll be a struggle. But you and I keep talking, and eventually we'll get there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the reason, um, the very fact that most movies about AI, especially like, Terminator and all of these big blockbuster films, spin it as evil, convinces me to believe that that's not likely. And I agree with you that there's probably a future scenario where it will help liberate us from a bunch of responsibilities so that we can focus on things like this more often.
Hmm.
But this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I think that we've come to a very natural closing point, and I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your messaging. I appreciate your time in doing this. So I feel very happy and at peace with this conversation. So without further ado, I will now um, close it out peacefully. So thank you for listening, guys. Bye,
Yep.
guys.
Thank you for listening.